Well, if you are being followed, confronted, or questioned like Trayvon Martin was approached by George Zimmerman, what are your rights? What should you do? Well, we are moving the conversation forward this morning about the not guilty verdict Saturday in the George Zimmerman murder trial. Kansas City Urban League President Gwen is here, along with defense attorney Tom Porto. Thank you both for coming. You know, first of all, let's just talk about the not guilty verdict and your reaction to it. Let's show some video here. In Kansas City last night, about 50 people gathered at the Freedom Fountain across from the Brush Creek Community Center. Demonstrations were much larger, though, in Los Angeles and in New York, as well as in Florida. Now, for the most part, the protesters were peaceful. Clearly, the demonstrators, though, not pleased about the not guilty verdict. Just both of you, let's start with Gwen. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I was deeply saddened by the verdict. I was not surprised because as I watched the case unfold, particularly the defense, they did an excellent job of putting forth their case in contrast to what I think was a very poor job on the part of the prosecution. And so when you understand the justice system and how it's supposed to work, the jury received a case and they made a decision, and I respect the system. However, I was very concerned about the case, in that I was hoping that we could have gotten a manslaughter conviction.
Something.
Something, because clearly he was guilty of killing a young man, an innocent young man who was doing nothing more than walking in his neighborhood, wearing a hoodie. It doesn't matter. And I think the mistake that the prosecution made was that the prosecution was fearful of bringing race into its case, when in fact the case started on race. I mean, it was just really clear that Zimmerman stopped Trayvon Martin, followed him because he said a black guy with a hoodie, and so he racially profiled the young man.
Now, Tom, let's get your perspective on this. What are your, as a defense attorney and former public defender, your thoughts on exactly, the verdict first, and then what you consider happened?
First and foremost, this is a tragedy, and I think we can all agree that. A young man lost his life at the hands of another man. Absolutely a tragedy. But being a public defender for 5.5 years, being on the side of verdicts that I didn't necessarily want to have, having my clients being found guilty before, you have to look to the system and respect the system. I don't agree with the jury's verdict, but I think you have to respect it, because this is our system of justice.
So let's move the conversation forward to what do we do now? So if something happens to us, like we're walking along in our neighborhood or someone else's neighborhood on public property, what is the law in Kansas and in Missouri? What rights do I have in terms of defending myself if someone approaches me and say, hey, what are you doing here?
It's important that we remember that the Florida case was not a stand-your-own-ground case. Florida does have that law, but it didn't apply in this case. The Florida law is just like that in Kansas and Missouri. If you have a reasonable fear that someone is going to inflict serious physical injury upon you, imminently, right now, then you can react, and you can use that level of force to defend yourself. But you have to have a reasonable belief, and that's what this trial was about. It was whether George Zimmerman had a reasonable belief.
So what do we do now moving forward? Gwen, what do you say that we tell our kids if they're out, or heck, if we're out ourselves?
You know, I have a daughter, I don't have a son, and I would be, if I were the parent of a young African-American male today, I would be extremely concerned. And I wouldn't, it's unfortunate that a parent would have to sit their young black son down and say, when you're out walking about, you have to do A, B, C because you are black and someone may profile you. I don't know how you have that conversation with your child in America today.
Tom,
so
you're
it's a
saying
very unfortunate place.
You're saying don't confront, don't agitate. Is that pretty much what?
I'm saying it's regrettable. I'm saying that the world that we live in right now is not one that we'd want to live in, but where you need to assume that the other person has that right to use force against you. You need to assume that the other person has a weapon, and it's a terrible, terrible place that we are, but that's where we are.
And that's exactly what you were saying, Gwen.
Yeah, it's just really unfortunate. I mean, I felt like Trayvon Martin had a right to stand his ground because he was being pursued. And so that was flipped on him as if he were the perpetrator, and he wasn't.
All right, the conversation continues. Thank you, Gwen and Tom, for both being here today. All right.